Hi, welcome to the Wisdom Years. I'm Wayne Morrison. This is part 2 of a 3-part episode, my interview with my daughter, Jennifer Kupalo, who lost her husband at an early age. And I urge anyone who hasn't seen episode 1 of The Blessings of Cancer to go back and look at it now. And this is part 2 of that, and we will examine how Jennifer's life transformed for the worse for a while before it got better. Welcome back, Jen. So Rob becomes aware that he's not going to live. How did that take place?
So his odds were never good in the medical field. They were never good, but I always say Rob knew way before I did that he was leaving, and there was a very distinct moment. We had been, back and forth to the doctor. Chemo had started, and I was laying my head on his chest, and I said, "Don't die." And he said, "I'll try not to for you and the kids, but I want you to know, I also know I'm going to." And that was very early on, very early. I want to say 6 to 8 weeks in. And my initial response was anger. I was really angry with him for saying it, but he, in retrospect, always knew. So he's back and forth to chemo, and anybody who's gone through it knows there's a lot of sleeping that happens as a result. So he's sleeping in the day, and I'm checking on him, and at one point I check on him, and he's woken up and he physically looks different. And he goes, "You have to come in here and you have to sit down." I said, "What?" So Rob had a very, very close friend named Danny pass away 2 years prior to his own passing, very suddenly, very unexpectedly. You need to know this for a story. Danny developed alopecia as a late teen, but he and Danny were friends always since, kindergarten on. And that's important to the story. So he says to me, "It's not a dream. I'm going to call it a dream. It's not a dream. Here's what happened to me. Danny came to me in a rowboat, and he was so healthy. When he got older, Danny had some health problems. He said he was so healthy. He was the best version of himself, and he had a full head of hair, and he loved that for him. He just really loved it for him. He said he had a full head of hair, and he was in this very simple boat on this very serene lake. And he said, I remember he said you could see to the bottom of it. It was crystal clear. And he said, I knew to get in the boat, and no words had been spoken by him. And I got in the boat, and we were just joyous. We were just full of joy. And Danny just rowed me across this lake. We didn't speak a word. And he said, when we got to the edge, he got out of the boat, and I stood to get out. And Danny said to me, "Not yet, but I will come back for you." And he said, that was real. That happened. And so this was the first spiritual thing that happened to him, but not the last. And it was definitely the most impactful. From that moment on, the way I tell it to family and friends is that's when he came to a place of peace. Rob went through those traditional steps of anger, denial, all of it. And this was that moment for him. He was just different. And it gave me a lot of peace. Not all the peace I got eventually, but it gave me a lot of peace. It gave him all the peace. He was different after that, very different. Additionally, a couple weeks before he died, maybe 3 to 4 weeks before he died, he was getting increasingly ill. And he was in the bedroom a lot. He was in a hospital bed by that point. And I was sitting on the side of the bed, and he said, "Do you see Anthony?" Now, Anthony's his brother, who in a crazy scenario also died 6 months prior to his diagnosis, had died very unexpectedly, very young. And I said, "What do you mean, do I see Anthony?" And he said, "He's right there in the corner." And he meant it. And he was slightly frustrated that I couldn't see Anthony in the corner. But at this point, Rob had had so much spirituality, so much spiritual things happening to him that I had learned how to talk with him that way. And so I said, "No, I don't see him, but I know you see him." And he did. And that happened to him. Anthony came to him a few times, sometimes just there.
So, getting to the point where Rob passes away, and you go through that initial process of burying him and beginning to attempt to run your life with 2 children, What happens in your life? Which direction does your life go?
Immediately, what I did was got all the help in the world I could for my kids. So I was researching, going to different therapies, getting my daughter into therapy, getting my son into therapy. I knew it was really, really important to get them back into a routine, so I get them back into school fairly right away. They took 1 week out. I get them right back into school, and I'm driving them to school, and I'm picking them up from school. And my life becomes, for years really, a continual cycle of being a single parent and simultaneously dealing with their tremendous grief. And so for years, I teach in the day, I pick my kids up, I go to therapies, I go to all different types of appointments, and we plow ahead. But in doing so, what I did not realize ever, not even a thought of it, was I wasn't dealing with my own grief at all. So that shows up much later for me. And because of this experience and what I learned from it, I became a completely different human being, but certainly different teacher. I have always said, I will always say, if Rob didn't die early on, I would not be who I am today for sure. And I'm pretty sure I'd be a worse version of myself, almost positive.
So, getting to the point where Rob passes away and you go through that initial process of burying him and beginning to attempt to run your life with 2 children, what happens in your life? Which direction does your life go?
Yeah, so it's an interesting kind of cataclysmic clashing of a lot of significant events that happens to me in a very brief time period. Probably most important to this is that my kids are now much older. And so they're doing way less therapy, if any. They're needing me less. And so I have this newfound real freedom. And what happens is I was tremendously overweight. I end up having a gastric bypass surgery and I lose, I think, 175 pounds, somewhere around there. An incredible amount of weight. Simultaneously, I end up meeting somebody who's going to be the second serious relationship of my life. He is, for good and bad, very social. So what ends up happening in a kind of catastrophic way is I get exposed to a nightlife scenario, which I've never had with my first husband. He was a homebody. This particular relationship, his name's James, he's very social, likes to go out, and so I start going out at night with him. You know, clubs, nightclubs, sometimes shows, bars, restaurants, and I start having some alcohol, which up until this point, I mean, it was almost bizarre how little alcohol I had had. And so anxiety springs up, which I've always had to a degree. My anxiety starts to get really crazy. Simultaneously, I'm drinking, and I really enjoyed the drinking for a while, and then the drinking got very, very out of control. And then my drinking was a tool to manage anxiety, which led to full-blown alcoholism for a good 4-year period of my life. Very difficult time period for everybody in my family. Really tough stuff. Anybody who's dealt with it knows it's not easy.
In the next episode, we'll find out how Jennifer was able to reclaim her life. Goodbye.